going on, everybody? This is Grayson Mann here alongside David Hood, my very professional co-host, and Faxon Childress here. Guys, this is going to be a trio we're going to try to continuously bring during the college football season. This is honestly the advertisement to watch us on YouTube. Just for that alone, we've got the hoodie shenanigans. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in. We want to thank Newton Scott and Associates and Chick-fil-A for their sponsorship. We'll have more on that later. But today, like I had mentioned earlier, we have Faxon Childress of 105.5 The Roar, host of Faxon Sports, Monday through Friday. You know the name. You hear him on the radio. You turning on the FM. You're getting it going. David says no. I guess he's the only one. But Faxon, first and foremost, you got a little bit of a view to show us, I'm pretty sure, of the digs for today.
Oh, yeah, man. We're over at Furman University, gorgeous campus. It's football season, fellas, so I had to match the vibe today, coming live from a stadium of a D1 program. But in all seriousness, excited to join the program. Anytime I get to come on the Orange Crush podcast is a blessing, and let's hope we can keep this a little bit more tame than we do in the media room during the breaks between interviews.
Yeah, so why are you over at Furman today?
Over at Furman, doing doing Furman women's soccer. I did a Furman versus Clemson women's soccer game here last year, so I've been doing Furman soccer and all their sports on TV on ESPN Plus for 5 years now. This will be my 5th year, so yeah.
Let's hope that you don't mix up the two schools on the air. That'd be do it here. You can do it here.
Program. Yeah.
But the reason we brought you all today is, you know, you bring the fire, man. You have a lot of, I think, strong opinions is the right word, and none could be stronger than about your Clemson Tigers this year. Getting ready for an LSU bout. You and I were on the radio today. We're 16 days away of recording this. 16 days, 2 Saturdays away from a high-stakes clash. So I think just kind of set the scene here of this little quick podcast, I'd love to sort of get your thoughts as we ramped up to that kind of momentous occasion here to kick it off. The thoughts, have they changed for the last several months? It feels like fall camp, we got a little bit more information about this group and a little bit more on the LSU side. So I just kind of love to set the scene on where this team has been throughout with your head.
Yeah, I think Clemson is the best team in the country on paper. I mean, if we're going to bring me on the podcast, I'll rip off my opinions just to get us started. I think this is a team that has an immense amount of talent at just about every key position group on the field. And I also think Clemson's getting a little bit underrated on the national scale, even with the amount of steam it feels like they have behind them. I think some of the question marks that people have, such as a running back, might end up being a strength by the end of the season with a guy like Adam Randall, who Dabo Swinney believes will be one of the best stories in college football. And I couldn't agree more. So I'm just really excited for this group this season. And keep 2 healthy and anything is possible as far as I'm concerned. I think the schedule is probably the most difficult it's been since maybe 2018. 2016 would also be in there. But if this team's as good as I think they are and many others believe them to be, you can roll the ball out and beat everybody on your schedule.
I kind of agree with you. I think this team is the way it's supposed to look. I did a show on Sirius XM earlier today where I said this looks like 2018. I have questions about running back. My questions are more along the lines of how much of a difference will Tom Allin make? We think he'll make a big difference, but this is still the same group that missed run fits, that missed tackles, that played absolutely horrific on defense. Some of it was scheme, some of it was coaching. Was some of it talent? Will it make a difference? Or are we going to see the same old against LSU? I'm one of those guys that you got to show me. Pretend I'm from Missouri. You got to show me first before I'm going to completely buy in. I think Texas and Ohio State definitely maybe the 2 most talented teams in the country. But Clemson's got kind of that indefinable it factor of being together. This is a group that's growing up together. They want to win together. They're ready to win. We'll see how that goes. But I'm kind of on the fence right now. You got to show me first.
I feel like I'm somewhere in the middle between the two of you. Like, I think that David's points are pretty valid about this is kind of the same group. There's positives and there's negatives to that. Obviously, the continuity is going to be massive for a lot of other teams in the country that you enter fall camp, you're still trying to learn their names and kind of what makes them tick. And this group has kind of understood that. And I'd said on your show earlier, Faxon, this morning, and I think it's the most damning thing Dabo said probably about the 2024 squad is about kind of having to set the tone with this group and the intensity, the player-led stuff. It's been the small details that have shot Clemson in the foot, procedural penalties against Georgia, big plays being kind of cast aside, run fits, as you had alluded to. but that also with maturity comes experience. So has this has been a benefit, Faxon, and maybe is the question I want to ask is this team's taken its fair share of lumps. Are they ready to make that next step with everything they've kind of experienced in the last several years?
Yeah, I think that's a more than fair question. And, the way that I've elected to kind of view it and frame it throughout the course of this offseason is sometimes failure is necessary for success. And in the case of Cade Klubnik and in the case of a lot of the foundational pieces on this team, and heck, maybe even some of the coaches on this team at certain junctures, there has been failure the last couple of seasons. But with failure comes lessons. And what I think I've seen from number 2 specifically, and that's the head of the snake, is every single mistake that has been made has been turned into a growing moment. Like Cade was so much better last year than he was as the first year as a starter. And you hear stories that aren't reported on, if you don't have some stray guy standing at a camp, you don't figure out that Cade was repeating the same body movement for 45 minutes until he was drenched in sweat. Like it's little things like that behind the scenes that people might report on that you just don't necessarily know until somebody's there to see it and visualize it. But it makes so much sense to see why this kid has grown so much throughout the course of the last 2 seasons. Sweeney sings the praises of his work ethic. I think all of that is very, very valid. And I think that what's happened to Cade Klubnik as well is he's grown up as a leader and grown up as a man throughout that process. When we had golden retriever Cade, as many were calling it, or when he was a puppy, right, with the wide eyes and he was making mistakes and playing hero ball, it didn't necessarily feel like he had a great pulse on that locker room. It didn't feel like people were necessarily rallying around him. And I think that's the biggest thing that changed from year 1 to year 2, not on the football field, was those guys were ready to go to war for him each and every down. And that wasn't the case his first year as a starter. So I think with all this continuity, with all this retention, especially on that offensive side of the ball, with one of his best friends making transitions to a running back and now projected to be the starter, it's all out in front of Clemson headed into the upcoming season. And I think the off the field stuff, like you alluded to this morning on my show, Grayson, is just so important. And Cade's done such a phenomenal job of growing as a leader throughout the course of the past 2 seasons.
I'm glad you said that about the puppy. The puppy's kind of what I called him. And it struck me when I was out on the practice field a couple of weeks ago, watching him. He used to bounce in between drills like a kid, like a toddler, like a puppy. Skip, just that kind of enthusiasm, exuberance, whatever you want to call it. Now he's an older dog. And that older dog's got a little bite to him. And I saw him talking to some of the younger quarterbacks, maybe not being quite as exuberant, more settled, knowing what he has to do. The drills are old hat to him now, kind of being the leader, not only on this team, but in that quarterback room. And that was the thought that I had standing there. I thought, well, the puppy is now an old dog that's got a little bite to him, and I like it. I like it a lot. I thought it was really funny. He actually went over it had just finished raining, and they have those tents that are in the middle of the 2 fields. And Cade made sure that as Trent Pierman came in behind him, that he jumped up and grabbed one of the edges of the tent so that all the water would pour on Trent as they moved in between fields. And I thought that's what an older brother would do to a younger brother, right? Like, haha, now you're wet, deal with it. And I like seeing that. I like seeing that leadership out of him.
Before we get back to this video, we'd like to thank the title sponsor for this podcast, Newton, Scott, and Associates. This team is headlined by Jeff Scott, former Clemson assistant coach and 2-time national champion, as well as Eric Newton, a longtime local and trusted real estate partner. These two are teaming up to provide a first-class experience for all Clemson fans. Whether you're looking to buy, sell, or build in the upstate area of South Carolina, you can trust Newton, Scott, and Associates. Choose the same team that Clemson coaches are selecting when they're looking to buy, sell, or build, all the way from Tigertown to Lake Kiowee. For more information, you can find them at newtonscottsc.com or by calling the number 864-722-9062. That's 864-722-9062. Now, let's get back to the video.
Yeah, and I think Faxon, one of the more fascinating things, and you've been very vocal about some of the opposition of Clemson's schedule, and you kind of mentioned about it being a tougher schedule, sort of like 2018, and we don't really view 2018 as a hard schedule because Clemson pile drove through everybody that year, but there were some talented teams that they had to go through. A&M on the road, they had to play a really good Syracuse team. You keep going on and on and on, but this year there are some challenges. They're going to go on the road against Georgia Tech. Obviously, LSU is the big target on site for in the next couple weeks. They got to go find out what kind of mystery Bill Belichick's going to have at UNC. They're going to play a good SMU team. They're going to play a Florida State team that maybe has a little bit more bite to it than it did last year. When you look at the ACC and who could potentially take Clemson's crown, who is that chief threat?
I think it's Miami. I think it's Miami this year. And I'm not traditionally, like, if you go back and listen to every piece of work I've ever done in the media, it has been anti-Cristobal and anti-Miami. This is the year for them to get it turned around and go to Charlotte, unfortunately. And I won't be rooting for it, but it is what I believe to happen. Or is going to happen rather. But I do believe that the ACC is going to be a lot better than people realize this year and a lot deeper than people realize this year. For example, a couple teams that I think could challenge to be in Charlotte, Georgia Tech. I know a lot of people are high on them. I'm buying what Brent Key's selling in Atlanta and have been for a couple years. He's the guy. They've got the talent. They've got experience at key positions. And I think their receivers are the most underrated in the country. Keep your eye on Rivers and Patterson, the two transfers from FIU. Their staff is over the moon about those two, and they think it's the most complete wide receiver room they've had in the key era down in Atlanta, even with the departure of Eric Singleton Jr. to Auburn. So keep your eye on Georgia Tech. Louisville has to be respected because Jeff Brom rolls out of bed every morning. He eats whatever his cereal of choice is, and he wins 8+ games. He does it everywhere he goes. So they're going to be in the mix. The question is to what degree, and can Miller Moss match that production that Tyler Shuck had last year at the QB spot? But they have the best running back in this conference that we're way too familiar with in Isaac Brown for Louisville. So I keep your eye on Louisville. We mentioned Miami. I just think they're way too good up front on both sides of the football to not be in the mix. The talent level is absolutely overflowing. They've revamped their scheme and talent on the defensive side of the ball. I'm buying the fact that they can be a game manager for Carson Beck, and they're going to run it, and he's going to hit his spots in the short and intermediate game and pick up yards after catch. And guess what? If you go 10-2 and you lose to one good team and one bad team, you're probably in the playoff if you're Miami, especially with their preseason billing. And then the final team, or two teams, I would say, getting a little long-winded here. Sorry, y'all, bear with me. Duke and SMU. Keep your eye on both of them. Both of those teams have very, very dynamic quarterbacks that have a chance to be all conference caliber players. And when you have an elite quarterback, you always have a chance. Duke won 9 games last year. SMU won 11 games last year. Both of them kept a ton of their roster. SMU a little bit more on offense, Duke a little bit more on defense. But I'm buying that both of those teams cannot maybe replicate their success from last year in the win-loss column, but they're going to be competitive and in the mix down the stretch.
Yeah, so let me ask you this. We're talking about the ACC, and I'm glad we are. So the ACC has some interesting games that opening weekend that may go a long way towards determining the perception of the conference as we go throughout the season, because people are going to look at, NC State plays Duke. Is that going to change national perception? No. But NC State hosts East Carolina kind of on that first Thursday, August the 28th. Not a layup. I think NC State's probably a double-digit favorite. But last time we saw those two teams, they're out fighting in a bowl game and not very happy with each other. Georgia Tech travels to Colorado to take on Prime. And the Buffaloes, they've got a new quarterback out there, transfer from Liberty. And then you've got Syracuse at Tennessee. These are the 3 ACC SEC games. Syracuse at Tennessee a prohibitive favorite. You've got Alabama and Florida State. Alabama, probably a pretty prohibitive favorite. LSU and Clemson, and then South Carolina and Virginia Tech. So you've got 4 ACC kind of SEC games. Clemson is the only favorite out of that group and maybe the only one to win out of those 4. And then you add in Georgia Tech at Colorado, East Carolina at NC State. It can either be a really good weekend for the conference or a really bad weekend.
Yeah, I think that's very, very accurate. And I'm glad you brought up a couple of these matchups. I don't know about y'all, but let's start with the matchup with Tennessee. Are we buying in there? Because they don't have a quarterback. Their fan base is like up in arms right now in panic mode because they don't have a quarterback. It looks like they're going to go with Aguilar, the kid from App State, who I do think is a pretty decent player. But I don't know, man. I mean, Fran Brown won 10 games, and I know that the schedule wasn't crazy difficult, but you win 10 games in year 1 after being a DB's coach going to head coach, you get an immense amount of respect as far as I'm concerned. So I respect everything that Fran Brown has been able to accomplish thus far up at Syracuse. And I'm interested to see how that QB battle unfolds. I think that Fran Brown's son probably thinks it should be Ricky Collins. I'm not sure if Ricky Collins is going to end up starting in that game or if it's going to be Angeli. I haven't seen the latest updates up out in New York, but I do think that Syracuse might be getting a little undervalued in that spot. And then Virginia Tech. South Carolina is clearly a lot better on paper than Virginia Tech. And I don't think that that's really arguable, but that's a tricky spot. Sunday afternoon game. Everybody's already played before you. It's like a weird standalone spot. You're at a neutral site in Atlanta. Game's not going to be sold out. I hate playing mobile quarterbacks in week one because you don't have enough of an identity on the defensive side of the football to have all of your communication in order yet. And Drones is very dynamic. Now, VT was such a disappointment last year, and I fell for that gimmick amongst many others, and they really let everybody down. But now I think the stock might be a little bit too low. I don't think that South Carolina is going to lose the game, but don't be shocked if that's a one-possession game that's more competitive than people realize just because of where it breaks on the schedule and because of how much South Carolina is replacing on defense.
I think tricky is the right word there for probably both of those games because there's such a newness to it, especially at the quarterback spot for at least Syracuse and Tennessee. And I think for South Carolina, too, they're having kind of to retool the offense without someone like a Rocket Sanders. I'm not really sure, and the South Carolina fans that are watching the Nick Harbor reports, or I haven't really seen much about him from what we've been able to see. How is that new look with a couple of pieces that you're having to replace? I could see both those games coming down to the wire, and I think for the ACC, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, guys, I think probably just looking like you belong in at least those games is probably the first step before we go, okay, that's a win, that's a win. I think the Clemson one is probably the game where Clemson wins that no one would be necessarily shocked. But I think if you go out the end of the weekend and it's okay, it's South Carolina 24-21, Syracuse, Tennessee 20-17, you're thinking, okay, these teams are pretty good. They belong on the same field. And I think that's kind of the narrative that the ACC's probably struggled with.
Yeah, I don't disagree. All right, let me throw something at y'all because we got a couple more to get to before I get out of here. Am I crazy for thinking Florida State has a chance? Like, am I absent? Have I lost my mind for thinking Florida State has a chance against Alabama? Because it's the same thing with the mobile QBs. And last year, Thomas Castellanos ran all over Florida State. Alabama had big-time issues. They faded down the stretch. They looked like garbage in some of the last couple games. Everything we've seen from Ty Simpson so far has been suspect at this level. Renovated Doak, sellout, more juice than there's been in a little minute. I don't know. Maybe I'm putting on the spin too hard for the Seminoles, and maybe I'm too high on the ACC, and we come back in 2 weeks and I look like an absolute clown, but I'm just not of the belief that these games are going to be rollovers, right? Like I see Tennessee as a 14.5-point favorite, and I see Bama as a 13.5-point favorite. And I'm like, really? We think there's a 15-point gap between the talent level of Tennessee and Syracuse week one, and we think that Kalen DeBoer, after losing 4 games in week one, is just going to go into Doak in a rowdy environment. Ty Simpson's never started or played in anything close to that type of environment, and he's just going to be completely unfazed, and Florida State's just going to suck now? Like, I don't know. There's something – everybody's going one direction and, like, jamming on Castellanos and saying how trash they're going to be again, and that's, like, it's putting up a red flag in my brain where I'm like, something's not right here. Like, we're overlooking something. So I would keep your eye on Florida State. I actually might pick them to win that game.
With Doak being, they've kind of renovated it. We've been down there. We've seen the renovations up close as they were happening. Now it's done. It's a smaller crowd that's going to be there. They've kind of made that more of an intimate feel. And you get that band going with the tomahawk chop, and you get Chief Osceola coming out and throwing the spear into the logo. There may be how does Alabama kind of survive that opening onslaught to me? If you've got Ty Simpson and you're on the road and all of a sudden you look up and you're down 10-13-0, it could be a long day for them. But if they kind of come out and strike early, we know what they've got out at wide receiver. That's a dangerous cat.
Yeah,
absolutely. But we don't know some of the other pieces to Alabama. No, I'm with you on that. I think Alabama could be tested at Florida State. I think they've got a better roster. I think they've got better coaches, but playing on the road is always tough. And I think that that Florida State fan base and that band may play a little bit of a part in that opener.
And I'm gonna take oh, my bad, Jason. I was just going to say,
you're good.
Week one is always competitive. Like, these week one games are always kind of weird. So I feel more inclined to go against the grain when we have less of an identity for these teams and like less of a knowledge base for these teams. Like USC beat LSU last year. Nobody would have predicted that if you looked at their two rosters on paper, but that game did happen. People don't necessarily remember it. So it is what it is.
I'm going to take the opposite approach here. And I'm actually going to, I wouldn't be shocked. Let's say you don't watch that game with FSU and Alabama, and you're going to go check out the YouTube highlights. You're like, okay, how does this turn out? And after a quarter, you're going to see probably, oh, Florida State's kept this pretty close. Skip. Alabama's up 35-10. I do think that this is a game where you got to look at this in DeBoer's perspective here. He had to replace the man last year. There's so much turbulence. There's so much, I think, that he had to sort of overcome. And let's not forget, this is a really good head coach here that was able to turn Washington to the national championship. That was a pretty good Washington team. He lost so much continuity there with Saban leaving. He's had to reinvent what Alabama is. And I think with a quarterback like Ty Simpson, you would kind of mention the inexperience. There's nothing more helpful than having two out on the boundary and be able to say, hey, go do this. And he knows he's going to get that done. I think this is an Alabama team that's going to come out desperate. They got to win this game if they want to even have a shot at the playoff because of the schedule with the SEC. I wouldn't be shocked if, added with the fuel to the fire, that Alabama is no longer to be able to be saved with Nick Saban with these comments. I think it's all a perfect storm for Alabama to come out and make a statement that DeBoer's got this. He's going to right the ship. I like Alabama by a lot. Okay. And so,
great.
Faxon, I know you got to get going, so we're going to use these last 2 minutes here. If you enjoyed the end of this conversation with us kind of shifting towards week one of college football, you should tune in a couple Fridays with Faxon Childress being a consistent presence on this podcast where we're going to break down all the big games along with Clemson. But Faxon, before you go, plug your stuff. Where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Faxon Sports, at FaxonPXP, and check me out from 9 a.m. to noon on 105.5 The Roar. I'll also be doing Tiger Tailgate Show this year as the lead co-host for that, so looking forward to that with the network pregame, and excited to bring content to you guys on game day. We're going to have you Monday through Friday on my show. I'll be on this show on Fridays. Hope you get used to seeing my face, or at least hearing my voice, and hope that maybe some of the folks on TigerNet have a warming up process to me with how the reception's been thus far today. So love all the folks that tune into the podcast, though. In all seriousness, it's always a blast on here, and we can never keep it too serious with you two. So I blame David for that.
David's got the headphones over there, and I think he's going to get them ready. But, guys, thank you, as always, for tuning into the Orange Crush podcast. Subscribe to Faxon Stuff. Follow him on Twitter. You guys know the drill. David's looking for something. I think he's looking for you to subscribe with those headphone, binocular-looking things. Thank you, as always, guys. God bless y'all. Have a good one.